Lee Altier, College of Agriculture, and I'm going to focus on a course I've taught for quite a few years called Food Forever. It's a GE upper division course in the cross-cultural exploration theme. And now, starting this fall, it's going to be what they call a slash course. It'll be taught alternate semesters in combination with the World Food and Fiber course. And it'll be in 3 pathways: food, international development, and sustainability. So I'm going to try to quickly go over just basically my approach to writing in this class. I want to start off talking about the student learning objectives, outcomes that are associated with my writing assignments. And then I'll give you kind of an overview of the 2 major assignments that I have in the class. It used to actually be 3, and the scoring load for all the students, and I have a lot of students. Typically, per section, we have about 100 students, so it's the grading is significant. And I'll talk about a process that I learned actually from the Writing Center. I invited people from the Writing Center to come into the class a number of years ago, give me advice on how to approach assigning these writing reports. And then talk about how I use rubrics. Right. Here's the relevant learning outcomes that I have. Understanding of relationships of humans with the ecosystems in which they live. Knowledge and sensitivity to a wide range of environmental issues. Effective written communication skills. Ability to assess quality of different sources of information. And skills in decision-making, problem-solving, and critical thinking. So, as you'll see, my writing assignments are really focused on these outcomes. First of all, the formatting got messed up a little bit. The first major writing assignment is what's referred to as a decision case study. So it's typical of other case studies that you may work with, where there's a description offered to the students of some situation. And what I use is it's a dilemma. There's a problem or a conflict involved, usually involving 2 or more parties. And it's a decision case study in the sense that it's open-ended. There's this conflict. They're provided the issue and information about the case, but there's no resolution. And it's their job to work on identifying alternatives, evaluating those alternatives, and summarizing what's a reasonable possibility for resolution. So it's complex. In this course, because it's a science course involving food production, but also in the context of multicultural perspectives, it has both environmental, economic, and social dimensions. The students are expected to identify the concerns of the key decision makers involved, and then evaluate various alternatives based upon those concerns. And that's key. It's because what I try to do is to get them out of their preconceptions, put themselves in the shoes of those decision makers, think about what their concerns are, and then make appropriate evaluations. tendency is for students to look at it from their own Chico, Northern California perspective and forget about the concerns of the people in Thailand or Africa or wherever the case might be. So this has been fun for me because it's interesting to see how the students, what kind of alternatives they come up with, and then how they endeavor to resolve the case. I do require a small amount of research. And this is mostly, I didn't used to. I used to just ask them to develop the case report based strictly on the information provided in the case itself. But I realized the second major writing assignment was so research intensive that they needed a little preparation on how to evaluate available literature and how to use it properly in the report. So this is a little bit of prep for the second one. Any comments or questions about this? All right. Second report is it's focused entirely on choosing a topic that I give them a variety of topics from which to choose. It's not entirely on their own, but the variety covers quite an array of things. And then recently I've started asking them to use the library research station. Tendency is they'll go on the web, they'll use a lot of company websites for information, and I said no, you have to use reputable journals. I ask that they have at least 7 outside articles, and I ask that 3 of them be peer-reviewed. Minimum 5 pages. I've found that because of what I expect in the papers, under 5 pages tends to be, it just isn't rich enough. The content isn't there. So both of them, yeah. All right. Now I mentioned how I got help from the Writing Center a few years back on how to approach these assignments, and this was so helpful for me. So I shifted from at points in the course where, okay, you have a paper due and turn it into me on this date. That's how I started off. The Writing Center people said, wait a minute, slow it down. Break up the assignment into parts and get them focused on different aspects of the paper. And so I shifted the approach, and with their guidance, now each of these assignments is broken up into 4 parts. They start off just by answering a few questions. And they can do it, in an evening, just, within an hour. All they have to do is read through some initial articles. It might be one article or several articles related to the topic or the case. And then they answer the questions. There's no outside research required. And it gets them thinking about the topic. Instead of, the whole idea of this multi-step approach is at least a month before the final paper is due, they're starting to work on it, think about it, discuss it with their classmates. So they answer the questions, and I typically have them get together in groups and share their answers with their group members and compare what they came up with. Then a week or 2 later, there's a draft due. And I always have the initial questions directly related to the content of that draft. So those questions are built into part of the assignment. Then we do peer reviews. So the students within their groups exchange papers and they do critiques of at least 2 other people in the group. And then a final draft is due. So this is at least a month-long process. Typically there's at least a week between each of these parts. Right. Let me give you an idea of a little bit more about the assignment and the rubrics I use. Okay, so this is description of the research report that we do. This is all online, and so they can scroll down here and pick out a variety of different topics related to urban agriculture, issues about genetically modified organisms, and so on. Big variety. And then when they click on these, it actually takes them to a website where the topic is described in an initial article. It's not meant to be comprehensive, but more to pique their interest about the topic. And then associated with each of those topics, then they, like I mentioned, they answer some initial questions, and they click on the next part of the assignment, and associated with each of those topics, there's various questions. Yes? How big? In class, the groups are usually about 5 students. Online, the groups are bigger, usually about 10 students. All right. So I'm rather prescriptive. These assignment descriptions have become more and more elaborate as I realize students need more guidance on how to cite properly, where to look for resources, that sort of thing. So it's gotten longer. And then I have detailed suggestions on the parts of their paper, so on. And then some common mistakes. I really discourage them from including a lot of opinion or writing with a lot of quotes. And you may all have experienced getting papers where it's just a bunch of quotes pasted together. And, yeah, very common. And one thing else I wanted to point out is I have a self-scoring report that's required to be turned in with the paper. And it's kind of a final check for the student to check himself or herself to see if they really followed the components of the assignment. And then I also have added a quiz, which is another check. And so, show you. Here's the self-scoring report. And this actually parallels the critique form that they use for peer reviewing each other's papers. But basically, with the rubric, they just score themselves for each of the parts. And we use the same rubric exactly for giving them their grade. And let's see. Oh yeah, and then we have this quiz where they are asked a few questions about citing information and references. A couple things about how many pages and how many references they used. Despite the fact that I said, I'm not going to even accept your paper if it doesn't have at least 7 references and isn't 5 pages long, I get a lot of submissions that don't follow that. So I included that in the quiz. Oh, actually, this isn't graded. Oh, that's another thing. It's so neat with the online format. Until they pass this quiz with 100%, the link to submit their paper doesn't show up. And so they have, some of them take it 4 or 5 times before, there's only 5 questions. So if they guess number of times, they'll eventually pass it. But, and then the link opens up for them and they submit their paper. Yeah, I mean, throughout my whole course, I'm using more of those gateway quizzes where they can't get into the next module until they pass the quiz. I wanted to mention I do use Turnitin. And when I started using Turnitin, it was just, I was shocked at how much I wasn't aware of in terms of the misuse. Not necessarily outright plagiarism, but the misuse of resources. And if you haven't looked at Turnitin, I strongly recommend it. Because it actually, I let them see their Turnitin score. If they turn in their paper early, they can see their score, see where there's issues, and make corrections before the final paper is turned in. If their final paper still has issues, I count off pretty severely. They leave out quotation marks, they forget to cite their sources, a lot of things like that.